In the scorching heat of Arizona Territory, 1880s, death comes slow and merciless. Eva Merritt awakens to find herself bound with rough rope, abandoned in the endless desert by the very outlaws she once called family. Her crime: knowing too much about their blood-soaked plans. Left to die with her unborn child, she faces the cruel mathematics of survival. No water, no shade, no hope. Then a shadow falls across her sun-blistered face. Silas Boone, a scarred cowboy with haunted eyes and a reputation that makes hardened men cross themselves, finds her moments from death. For reasons he can't explain, this man who hasn't shown mercy in decades chooses to save her. He carries her to a hidden canyon refuge, nursing her back to life while keeping his own dark secrets buried. But some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some enemies never stop hunting. What terrible truth did Eva discover that made her own gang abandon her to die? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The canyon appeared as if the earth had simply opened its arms to embrace them. What had seemed like solid rock face from a distance revealed itself to be a cleverly concealed passage, barely wide enough for horse and rider. Silas guided judgment through the narrow opening with the ease of long familiarity, and Eva found herself holding her breath as the walls closed around them like the pages of a book. "Easy now," Silas murmured, though whether he spoke to his horse, to Eva, or to himself remained unclear. The passage wound deeper into the stone heart of the mesa, the desert heat gradually giving way to the cool embrace of permanent shade. Water trickled somewhere in the darkness ahead. Not much, but enough to make Eva's parched throat tighten with anticipation. After what felt like an eternity of navigating by feel and instinct, they emerged into a hidden sanctuary that took Eva's breath away. The canyon opened into a natural amphitheater, perhaps 100 yards across, its walls rising on three sides like the buttresses of some ancient cathedral. A spring bubbled up from the rock at the far end, feeding a small pool before disappearing again into underground channels. Cottonwoods clustered around the water source, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind that couldn't quite escape. The canyon's embrace. Against the eastern wall stood a structure that had clearly been built by human hands, though it seemed to grow from the rock itself. Adobe and stone, weathered to the color of old bones, with a roof of pine poles and mud that had been patched and repatched over the years. Smoke drifted lazily from a stone chimney, and Eva realized this wasn't just a shelter. It was a home. "Who built this place?" she asked, as Silas helped her down from the horse. "Miners, originally," he replied, his voice carrying easily in the canyon's natural acoustics. "Silver played out 20 years ago, but they built it to last." He paused, studying her face with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "Been my sanctuary for the better part of 5 years now." Eva nodded, though something in his tone suggested the word sanctuary carried more weight than simple description. She watched as he unsaddled judgment with practiced efficiency. His movements, economical and sure. Everything about Silas Boone spoke of a man who'd learned to depend on himself alone, which made his decision to help her all the more puzzling. "You must be wondering what brings a pregnant woman to keep company with the Blackwood gang," she said, settling carefully on a sun-warmed boulder near the spring. The water was so clear she could see every grain of sand on the bottom, and she had to resist the urge to plunge her entire head beneath its surface. Silas hung the saddle on a wooden frame built for the purpose. "Figure you'll tell me when you're ready," he said simply. "Or not at all, your choice." The casual acceptance in his voice nearly undid her. Eva had grown so accustomed to suspicion, to the constant need to justify her presence and prove her worth. That simple courtesy felt like a gift she didn't know how to accept. "I wasn't always like this," she said, one hand resting on her belly. "Riding with outlaws, I mean, though I suppose everyone says that. Some do, some don't." Silas filled a battered coffee pot from the spring and set it on a grate over the fire. "Pitt, some folks just end up where they end up, and the telling of it don't change nothing." Eva studied his profile as he worked. The scar that marked his face was old but deep, the kind that spoke of violence survived rather than violence sought. His hands, she noticed, bore no calluses from quick-draw practice or gunslinger's habits. Instead, they showed the honest wear of a man who'd worked with tools and rope, who'd built things rather than simply destroyed them. "You're not what I expected," she said. That earned her a glance, though his expression remained unreadable. "And what did you expect? Someone harder, I suppose. Someone who'd want something in return for helping." Silas was quiet for a long moment, watching the coffee begin to boil. "Maybe I am harder than you think," he said finally, "and maybe I do want something in return." Eva tensed, her hand moving instinctively to the small knife she kept hidden in her boot. But when Silas looked at her again, his grey eyes held no threat, only a weariness that seemed older than the desert itself. "Peace," he said. "That's what I want. Been wanting it for longer than I care to remember." The simple honesty of it disarmed her completely. Eva had spent months among men who measured their worth in violence and spoke of peace like it was a weakness to be mocked. To hear it spoken aloud, without shame or apology, felt like hearing a foreign language she'd once known, but had forgotten how to speak. "The Blackwood gang doesn't traffic in peace," she said. "No, I don't imagine they do." Silas poured coffee into 2 tin cups, testing the temperature before handing one to Eva. "Want to tell me how you came to ride with them?" Eva wrapped her hands around the warm metal, drawing comfort from its simple heat. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it drove the last of the desert's dust from her throat. "I was working at a hotel in Tucson," she began. "The Excelsior, nothing fancy, just cleaning rooms and serving meals to travelers. The pay was poor, but it was honest work, and I had—" She paused, her free hand moving to her belly again. "I had reasons to stay. Respectable." Silas nodded without judgment, waiting for her to continue. "The father of my child was a traveling merchant named Thomas Kearney, dealt in dry goods and mining supplies, had a route that took him through Tucson every few months. He was kind to— We talked about settling down, maybe starting a family." Eva's voice took on a bitter edge. "Course, he forgot to mention the wife and 3 children he had waiting back in Santa Fe." "Ah." Silas sipped his coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. "And when you found out?" "When I told him about the baby, he gave me $50 and told me to take care of it." Ava's laugh held no humor. $50. Like that was enough to erase 6 months of promises and sweet words. The canyon fell quiet except for the gentle murmur of the spring and the distant call of a hawk somewhere. High above, Eva found herself studying the play of light and shadow on the canyon walls, the way the afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Lost my position at the hotel when I started showing," she continued. "Hotel manager said it wasn't proper for a respectable establishment to employ an unwed mother. Seems respectability's a luxury you can only afford when you've got choices. So you fell in with the Blackwoods." "Not at first. I tried to find other work, but word gets around in a small town. Eventually, I was down to my last few coins, sleeping in an abandoned shack outside town and wondering if maybe Thomas Kearney's $50 might have been the better choice after all." Silas refilled her cup without being asked, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed more understanding than a dozen speeches about hardship and desperation. "That's when I met Cole Blackwood," Eva said. "He was in town buying supplies, and he saw me at the general store, counting my coins twice to make sure I had enough for a loaf of bread. He struck up a conversation, seemed genuinely concerned about my situation, said his gang was more like a family, that they looked after their own. And you believed him." "I wanted to believe him. There's a difference." Eva took a sip of coffee, using the pause to gather her thoughts. "Cole was handsome in that dangerous way some women find irresistible. silver-tongued too, made it sound like riding with them would be an adventure, a chance to take back some of what life had stolen from me. How long were you with them? 4 months. Long enough to learn that Cole Blackwood's version of family involves a lot of people ending up dead. Eva's voice hardened. They called me their lookout, said my job was to keep watch while they handled business, made it sound almost respectable, but it wasn't. Respectable men don't leave 3 witnesses dead after robbing a stagecoach. Respectable men don't burn down a ranch house with the family still inside because the owner tried to fight back. Eva set down her cup with hands that had begun to shake. I told myself I was just the lookout, that I wasn't really part of the killing. But watching evil and doing nothing about it, that's just evil with a clean conscience. Silas was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes reflecting the play of firelight from the cook fire. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of personal experience. Sometimes the choosing gets taken away from you, he said. Sometimes you find yourself in places you never meant to be, doing things that would have horrified the person you used to be. The question isn't how you got there, it's what you do once you realize where you are. Something in his tone made Eva look at him more closely. You sound like a man who knows something about that kind of choosing. Maybe I do. Silas stood and walked to the edge of the pool, staring down into its clear depths, as if looking for answers written in the sand below. Point is, you figured out who they really were. That's more than some folks manage. Lot of good it did me. Or them. Eva's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The night before they left me in the desert, I overheard Cole and his lieutenant, Jack Morse, planning their next job. Not just another stagecoach or ranch house, something bigger, much bigger. Silas turned back to face her, and Eva saw something sharp and alert kindle in his grey eyes. How much bigger? They were talking about a Wells Fargo shipment, gold-bound for the territorial capital, enough to buy half the legislature if a man knew the right palms to grease. Eva's hands tightened around her coffee cup. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was listening to them plan how to eliminate the guards, how to make sure there were no witnesses left alive to identify them. And they knew you heard them. Cole caught me listening at the tent flap. Didn't say anything right then, just smiled that cold smile of his and told me to get some sleep. Said we had a long day ahead of us. Eva shuddered, despite the canyons. Warmth. I should have run that very night, should have taken one of their horses and ridden for the nearest town. Why didn't you? Eva looked down at her swollen belly, one hand tracing the curve where her child grew. Because I was scared. Because I didn't know where to go or who to trust. Because part of me still hoped that maybe Cole would change his mind, that maybe the man who'd been so kind to me in Tucson was still in there somewhere. But he wasn't. No. The next morning they tied me up and rode out before dawn, left me there with enough water for maybe half a day if I was careful with it. Eva's voice turned bitter. Cole even kissed my forehead before they left, told me he was sorry it had to end this way, said I'd brought it on myself by being too curious for my own good. The sun had moved during their conversation, and shadows were beginning to creep across the canyon floor. Silas stirred the fire back to life, adding a few pieces of dry wood from a stack that spoke of careful preparation and long residence. When's this Wells Fargo shipment supposed to happen? He asked. 3 days from now, maybe 4, depending on the weather and how fast they can travel. Eva set down her empty cup and looked directly at him. You're thinking about trying to stop them. It wasn't a question, and Silas didn't try to pretend otherwise. Thought had crossed my mind. Why? It's not your problem. You could just as easily head in the opposite direction, take your peace and solitude with you. Silas was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire as if it might offer answers to questions he'd been carrying for years. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low Eva had to strain to hear it. Because there was a time when stopping men, like Cole Blackwood, was my job. Because I swore an oath once and breaking it damn near killed me. He looked up at her, and Eva saw pain in his grey eyes, old pain, carefully tended but never healed. Because maybe helping you is the first right thing I've done in longer than I care to remember. Eva felt something shift in her chest, a warmth. That had nothing to do with the coffee or the fire. What kind of oath? But Silas had already turned away, his attention focused on preparing a simple meal from supplies stored in the adobe shelter. Whatever secrets he carried were his own, to keep or share, and Eva found herself respecting the boundary he'd drawn around them. As the canyon settled into the blue twilight of desert evening, Eva allowed herself to imagine, for the first time in months, that she might actually survive this ordeal. Not just her body, but the part of her that had been slowly dying during her time with the Blackwood gang. The part that still believed in right and wrong, that still hoped for something better than mere survival. Outside their hidden sanctuary, the desert stretched vast and unforgiving under the first cold stars. But here, beside a gentle fire and a spring that had flowed clear and true for longer than human memory, Eva Merritt began to remember what it felt like to hope. Eva woke to the sound of her own screaming. The fever had taken her sometime in the pre-dawn hours, transforming the peaceful canyon into a furnace of delirium and half-remembered terrors. She thrashed against the rough blankets Silas had wrapped around her, her body burning despite the cool morning air that drifted down from the canyon walls. "Easy now," came Silas's voice from somewhere beyond the red haze that clouded her vision. "You're safe, you're in the canyon." But Eva wasn't in the canyon, not entirely. She was back with the Blackwood gang, listening to Cole's voice as he outlined the details of the Wells Fargo robbery with the casual precision of a man planning a church social. "The shipment leaves Prescott on the 15th, Cole had said, his fingers tracing routes on a hand-drawn map. 40,000 in federal gold, bound for the territorial capital. Enough to set us all up for life if we play it smart." "What about the guards?" Jack Morse had asked. Jack was Cole's lieutenant, a man whose eyes held all the warmth of winter stones. "Wells Fargo don't ship that kind of money with just a driver and shotgun rider." 6 guards, all told. Professional men, not some local sheriff's deputies. Cole's smile had been sharp as a blade. "Which is why we're going to hit them at Willow Creek Canyon, where the road narrows down to nothing. They'll have nowhere to run, nowhere to maneuver." Eva's fevered mind played the conversation over and over, each repetition bringing new details into focus. The blood-stained locket around her neck, her mother's locket, the one thing of value she'd managed to keep through all her troubles, seemed to burn against her skin like a brand. "The photograph," she whispered, her voice barely audible above her labored breathing. Silas knelt beside her makeshift bed, a cool cloth in his hands. "What photograph?" Eva's fingers fumbled at her throat, finding the delicate chain that held her mother's locket. With tremendous effort she managed to work the clasp open, revealing the small daguerreotype inside. The image was faded, but still clear. A distinguished-looking man in a formal suit, his eyes kind but watchful. "My grandfather," she gasped. Judge William Merritt, Territorial Court." Silas went very still, his grey eyes studying the photograph with an intensity that cut through Eva's fever haze. "Merritt," he repeated, his voice carefully neutral. Cole knew, Eva continued, the words tumbling out in a rush of fevered confession. "When he found me listening, he saw the locket, recognized the face. That's why they couldn't. Just let me go." The implications hit Silas like a physical blow. A territorial judge's granddaughter, even an estranged one, riding with the Blackwood gang. The scandal alone would be worth a fortune to the right newspapers, but more than that, it connected Eva to the very system Cole Blackwood was planning to rob. "What else did you hear?" Silas asked, his voice gentle but urgent. Eva's eyes focused on his face with effort. "Inside man," she whispered. "Someone in the territorial government, feeding them information about shipments, schedules." Her breath came in short gasps. "They were laughing about it. Said their man was so deep in their pocket he might as well be wearing their colors." "Did they mention a name?" "No. But Cole said, Said when this job was done, they'd have enough money to buy the territorial capital outright. Said their man promised them immunity, protection. Eva's hand clutched at Silas's wrist with surprising strength. They're not just robbing wells. Fargo, they're robbing the entire territory. Silas sat back on his heels, his mind racing through the implications. 40,000 in federal gold was more than enough to corrupt half the officials in the territory. With that kind of money backing them, the Blackwood gang could operate with impunity, expanding their reach until they controlled trade routes across the entire Southwest. You have to stop them, Eva said, her voice growing stronger despite the fever that still burned in her cheeks. Not just the robbery, the whole corruption. My grandfather, he was an honest man, spent his life fighting men like Cole Blackwood. I can't let his name be connected to this. Your grandfather's dead. 3 years now. Fever took him, same. As it's trying to take me. Eva's laugh held a bitter edge, but his reputation still means something. If word gets out that his granddaughter was riding with outlaws, it'll destroy everything he worked for. Silas stood and walked to the edge of the pool, staring down into its clear depths as if seeking answers in the shifting patterns of light and shadow. The morning sun had climbed high enough to paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, but the beauty of the place felt fragile now, threatened by the violence that was rushing toward them like a desert storm. There's something you need to know, he said finally, his voice so quiet Eva had to strain to hear it. About me. About why I've been hiding in this canyon for 5 years. Eva waited, sensing that whatever he was about to tell her would change everything between them. My name isn't really Silas Boone, he said. It's Samuel Brennan. Used to be a federal marshal working out of Prescott. Your grandfather, Judge Merritt, he swore me in personally. The fever seemed to recede for a moment, leaving Eva's mind crystal clear. You knew him. I did. He was a good man, an honest man, one of the few in the territorial government who couldn't be bought or threatened into submission. Samuel turned back to face her, and Eva saw years of buried pain written in the lines around his grey eyes. He was also the judge who signed my arrest warrant. Eva's breath caught. For what? Murder. The murder of Judge Harrison Wade, Judge Merritt's closest friend and colleague. Samuel's voice was steady, but Eva could hear the old wounds beneath. The calm surface. Someone put 3 bullets in Judge Wade's back as he walked home from court one evening. Someone who knew his habits, his route, his schedule. But you didn't do it. No, but I was the only one who could have known all those details. The only one with access to the information the killer used. Samuel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. And there were witnesses who swore they saw me near the scene at the right time. False witnesses. Had to be, but they were convincing enough to make even Judge Merritt doubt me. I saw it in his eyes when he signed that warrant. He wanted to believe I was innocent, but the evidence... Samuel shook his head. I ran before they could arrest me. Been running ever since. Eva struggled to sit up, her fever-weakened body, protesting the movement. The corruption Cole mentioned, it goes back that far? Has to. Judge Wade was investigating irregularities in federal contracts, mining claims that didn't match the geological surveys. Someone needed him silenced, and they needed a scapegoat to take the blame. Samuel's voice turned bitter. A federal marshal with gambling debts and a reputation for violence fit the bill perfectly. Gambling debts. My wife died the year before. Tuberculosis. I didn't handle it well. Started drinking, started taking risks I never would have taken when she was alive. Samuel's shoulders sagged under the weight of old regrets. Made it easy for them to paint me as a man desperate enough to kill for money. Eva felt the pieces clicking together in her fevered mind. The same corruption that's protecting Cole. Blackwood now. They've been operating for years, eliminating anyone who gets too close to the truth. And now they're ready to make their biggest score yet, Samuel agreed. 40,000 in federal gold would give them enough money to buy their way into respectability. Instead of hiding in the shadows, they could operate openly, protected by the very laws they've been breaking. A sound echoed through the canyon, distant but unmistakable. The ring of iron horseshoes against stone, growing closer by the moment. Samuel was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip with practiced ease. "Get down," he whispered urgently. "Stay low and keep quiet." Eva rolled off the makeshift bed and pressed herself against the boulder where she'd sat the evening before, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sounds were closer now, multiple horses, moving with the careful precision of experienced trackers. "Track leads right to the canyon mouth," came a voice from the hidden passage, rough and familiar. "Jack Morse, Cole's lieutenant. She's in, and there somewhere." "You sure about this?" another voice asked. "Could be she just crawled off somewhere to die." "Cole wants to be certain," Jack replied. "Says we can't afford to leave loose ends, not with this bigger job coming up." Samuel had melted into the shadows near the canyon wall, his movements silent as smoke. Eva watched him position himself behind a screen of cottonwood branches, his revolver drawn but held low and ready. The morning light played across his scarred face, and for a moment he looked exactly like what he'd once been, a federal marshal preparing to face down armed criminals. "Besides," Jack continued, his voice echoing off the canyon walls, "if she's alive, we need to know what she told whoever found her. Could be there's more than one loose end needs cutting." The hoofbeats were at the canyon mouth now, pausing as the riders studied the narrow passage. Eva held her breath, praying that the hidden entrance would seem too unlikely for them to investigate. But these were experienced outlaws, men who'd survived by being thorough and suspicious. "Dismount," Jack ordered. "We go in on foot." Eva closed her eyes and pressed her face against the cool stone, feeling her unborn child shift restlessly within her. Everything she'd told Samuel the night before about wanting to warn the authorities, about stopping the robbery, seemed impossibly naive now. They were trapped in a box canyon with armed killers approaching, and even if Samuel was everything he claimed to be, he was still just one man against what sounded like at least 3 or 4. The sound of footsteps echoed through the passage, careful and measured. Jack Morse wasn't taking any chances, wasn't walking into what might be a trap without proper caution. In a few minutes, he and his men would emerge into the canyon and see the obvious signs of habitation, the fire pit, the coffee pot, the blankets Eva had been lying on. And then the shooting would start. Samuel caught her eye from his position near the wall and held up 3 fingers, then pointed toward the passage mouth. 3 men coming through single file. He mouthed a single word: "Stay." Eva nodded, though every instinct screamed at her to run, to find some way out of the canyon before the violence began. But there was nowhere to go, no other exit from this stone sanctuary that had become a trap. The first man emerged from the passage, not Jack Morse, but one of his followers, a thin scarecrow of a man with nervous eyes and a habit of chewing tobacco. He looked around the canyon with obvious amazement, taking in the spring, the trees, the impossible hidden paradise in the heart of the desert. "Well, I'll be damned," he called back to his companions. "There's a whole settlement in here." That was when Samuel stepped out of the shadows, his revolver trained on the man's chest. "Federal Marshal," he said in a voice that carried all the authority of his former position. "You're under arrest." The scarecrow man went for his gun, a stupid, instinctive move that sealed his fate. Samuel's shot echoed through the canyon like thunder, and the man crumpled to the ground without firing a shot in return. "Tommy!" "Jack!" Morse's voice roared from the passage. "What the hell?" But he was already moving, already charging through the narrow opening with his remaining companion at his side. The canyon erupted into chaos as guns barked and bullets whined off stone walls. Eva pressed herself against her boulder and covered her head with her arms, listening to the deadly conversation of lead and gunpowder that would determine whether she lived to see another sunset. The battle for the hidden canyon had begun. The gunfight lasted less than 3 minutes, but those minutes stretched like hours in Eva's fevered perception. Samuel moved through the canyon with the fluid precision of a man who'd survived countless such encounters, using every boulder and tree for cover as he methodically eliminated the threat to their sanctuary. When the smoke cleared and the last echo faded from the stone walls, 3 bodies lay still on the canyon floor. Samuel stood over them, his revolver still smoking in his hand, his grey eyes scanning the passage mouth for any sign of additional threats. "It's over," he said quietly, though he didn't holster his weapon. Eva emerged from behind her boulder, on unsteady legs, her fever-weakened body trembling from more than just illness. The peaceful sanctuary that had seemed so safe the night before was now a battlefield, marked by violence and death. "They'll send more," she said, her voice barely, above a whisper. "Maybe, but not right away." Samuel knelt beside the bodies, methodically searching through their belongings. Jack Morse was supposed to report back to Cole by sunset. When he doesn't show, they'll know something went wrong. "How long do we have?" "Day or 2 if we're lucky. Maybe less." Samuel straightened, holding a folded piece of paper he'd taken from Jack's vest pocket. "Long enough to figure out our next move." Eva watched as he unfolded the paper, revealing a hand-drawn map of the surrounding territory. Red X marks indicated various locations, with dates and times written in Jack's careful script. "What is it?" "Looks like a schedule, meeting points, supply caches." Samuel's finger traced the various markings. "And here," he pointed to a location marked with a black circle. "Willow Creek Canyon. Tomorrow morning." Eva felt her blood turn to ice water. The robbery moved up. They're not waiting 3 days. They're hitting the Wells Fargo shipment tomorrow. Samuel folded the map and tucked it inside his shirt, which means we don't have time to ride for help. By the time we could reach the nearest marshal's office, it'll all be over. The implications settled over Eva like a lead blanket. 40,000. In federal gold, enough to corrupt the entire territorial government. 6 guards who would die defending their cargo, never knowing they'd been betrayed by the very system they served. "We have to warn them," she said. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, transparent. "We," he said finally, "you can't go alone. Not against the whole gang. And you can't. Travel in your condition. The fever's broken, but you're still weak. And the baby will be fine," Eva interrupted, though she wasn't entirely certain that was true. "I've been traveling rough for months. A few more days won't hurt." Samuel shook his head. "It's not just about the travel. If we try to intercept that shipment, there's going to be shooting, a lot of it. You could be killed, and your child with you." Eva felt a familiar anger kindle in her chest. The same anger that had sustained her through months of Thomas Kearney's lies and the hotel manager's dismissal. "So I should just hide here while good men die? While Cole Blackwood steals enough money to buy his way into respectability? You should think about that child you're carrying. Think about whether revenge is worth risking an innocent life. This isn't about revenge." Eva stood straighter, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. "This is about justice, about honoring the memory of men like your Judge Wade and my grandfather, about making sure their sacrifices meant something." Samuel studied her for a long moment, and Eva saw something shift in his expression. A recognition, perhaps, of the kind of stubborn determination that had once driven his own commitment to the law. "You really knew my grandfather, didn't you?" she asked, sensing an opening. "I did. Served under his jurisdiction for 3 years before everything went to hell." Samuel's voice softened slightly. "He used to say that justice wasn't something you could delegate to other people. Said every man and woman had to decide every single day whether they were going to stand for what's right or just let the world slide a little deeper into darkness." Eva felt tears prick at her eyes. Not from fever this time, but from recognition. "He used to write me letters when I was small, before my parents forbade him from contacting us. Why did they cut him off? Because he wouldn't stop fighting, wouldn't stop making enemies of powerful men who could have helped my father's business. interests. Eva's voice turned bitter. They said his crusades for justice were costing the family money, respectability. Said he was too rigid, too uncompromising. And what did you think? Eva touched the locket at her throat, feeling the familiar weight of her grandfather's image against her skin. I thought he was the only honest man I knew, the only one who still believed that right and wrong mattered more than profit and convenience. Samuel holstered his revolver and walked to the edge of the spring, where he knelt and began washing the gunpowder residue from his hands. The water ran clear again within moments, as if the canyon itself was determined to cleanse away all traces of violence. There's something else you need to know, he said without looking up, about Judge Wade's murder, about why I was framed. Eva waited, sensing that he was about to share something he'd kept buried for 5 years. I was investigating the same corruption your grandfather suspected. Mining claims, federal contracts, territorial appointments that didn't add up. Judge Wade had asked me to look into it quietly, off the books. Samuel's hands stilled in the water. The night he was killed, I was supposed to meet with him. Was supposed to give him my report. But you didn't make the meeting. No. Got word that there was trouble at a saloon on the other side of town, a fight involving some federal prisoners. By the time I dealt with that and got to Judge Wade's house, he was already dead. Samuel stood and dried his hands on his shirt. Later found out the saloon fight was staged. Someone wanted me away from that meeting, wanted Judge Wade alone. When the killer came for him, the same someone who arranged for witnesses to place you at the scene, had to be. Which means they've been planning this for years, building their network, eliminating anyone who got too close to the truth. Samuel turned to face her, and Eva saw the weight of 5 years' worth of guilt and frustration in his grey eyes. Your grandfather signed that arrest warrant because he had to, because the evidence looked solid, and he was an honest judge who followed the law, even when it hurt. Eva felt something click into place in her mind. A connection she'd been groping toward since Samuel had first revealed his true identity. You think stopping this robbery might help clear your name? I think stopping this robbery might save a lot of lives, clearing my name. Samuel shrugged. That's a luxury I stopped hoping for a long time ago. But Eva could see the hope he was trying to deny, buried deep beneath years of bitterness and self-imposed exile. Samuel Brennan had been running from his past for 5 years, hiding in this canyon sanctuary like a wounded animal. The chance to strike back at the corruption that had destroyed his life was something he wanted, perhaps needed, more than he was willing to admit. You're going after them regardless of what I say, she observed. I am. Then you're going to need help. And, like it or not, I'm the only help you've got. Samuel started to protest, but Eva held up a hand to stop him. I know that country around Willow Creek Canyon, rode through it twice with the gang. I know their tactics, their signals, their habits. She paused, letting that sink in. More than that, I know Cole Blackwood. Know how he thinks, how he plans, what he'll do when things go wrong. And what will he do? Eva's expression darkened as she remembered the casual cruelty she'd witnessed during her months with the gang. He'll kill anyone who gets in his way. Guards, witnesses, innocent bystanders. Doesn't matter to him. He sees killing as just another tool, like a hammer or a rope. Samuel nodded grimly. Then we'd better make sure we have better tools. He walked to the adobe shelter and disappeared inside, returning a few minutes later with a canvas bag that clinked softly as he set it down. Eva watched as he unpacked the contents. Ammunition, a second revolver, several sticks of dynamite, and a badge that caught the morning sunlight like a silver star. You kept it, she said, recognizing the federal marshal's badge that should have been surrendered when he fled Prescott. Couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Seemed like giving up the last piece of who I used to be. Samuel picked up the badge and turned it over in his hands. Maybe it's time to remember that some things are worth fighting for, even if the fight costs you everything. Eva felt her unborn child shift restlessly within her, as if responding to the tension that filled The canyon air. Tomorrow morning, somewhere in the wilderness around Willow Creek Canyon, they would face the Blackwood Gang in a confrontation that would likely leave most of them dead. But for the first time since Thomas Kearney had walked out of her life with his empty promises and $50, Eva Merritt felt like she had a purpose worth the risks. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would not be a victim anymore. The fever had broken, and with it the last of her illusions about the kind of world she was bringing her child into. It was a world where corruption wore badges and justice hid in canyon sanctuaries. A world where good men were framed for murder and pregnant women were left to die in the desert. But it was also a world where people like Samuel Brennan still remembered their oaths, where the granddaughter of an honest judge could choose to stand and fight rather than run and hide. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, painting the canyon walls in shades of fire and gold, Eva began to understand why her grandfather had never stopped fighting. Even when it cost him his family's love and respect, some battles were worth more than survival. Some causes were worth more than safety, and some promises once made could only be kept with blood and sacrifice. The trading post at Copper Ridge squatted against the desert landscape like a weathered turtle shell, its adobe walls scarred by wind and time. Samuel approached it with the careful attention of a man who'd learned to read danger in the angle of a shutter or the absence of smoke from a chimney. But the post showed signs of normal life. Horses at the hitching rail, the soft murmur of conversation drifting through open windows. Eva rode behind him on a borrowed horse they'd taken from Jack Morse's men, her pregnancy making the journey more difficult than she cared to admit. The fever had left her weak, and every jolt sent waves of discomfort through her swollen belly. But she'd insisted on coming, and Samuel had eventually relented, understanding that her knowledge of the gang's operations might mean the difference between success and catastrophe. "Remember," Samuel said quietly as they dismounted, "we're married folks heading to Tucson. You're feeling poorly, need to see a doctor. Keep it simple." Eva nodded, though the deception sat uneasily with her. After months of living with lies and half-truths among the Blackwood Gang, she'd hoped to be done with pretense. But survival sometimes required compromise, and their mission was too important to risk on stubborn honesty. The trading post's interior was exactly what Eva had expected. Dim and cluttered, smelling of leather and tobacco, and the particular mustiness that came from goods too long in storage. The proprietor, a thin man with suspicious eyes and careful hands, looked them over with the practiced assessment of someone who'd learned to spot trouble before it could spread. "Help you folks?" he asked, his tone neutral but watchful. "Looking for supplies," Samuel replied, his voice carrying just enough of a drawl to sound like any other drifter. "Wife's feeling poorly, thought we might stock up before pushing on to Tucson." The proprietor's eyes flicked to Eva's obvious pregnancy, and his expression softened slightly. "Got what you need. Coffee, beans, salt pork, some medicine too, if that might help." "Obliged." Samuel moved to examine a rack of rifles, while Eva browsed among the shelves, both of them listening for any conversation that might provide useful information about the area or recent travelers. They didn't have to wait long. Two men sat at a makeshift table near the back of the store, sharing a bottle and speaking in the low tones of people discussing serious business. Eva recognized the type immediately, cowboys between jobs, the kind who hired their guns to whoever paid best and asked fewest questions. "Heard tell the Blackwoods are moving again," one of them was saying. "Big job, from what I gather." "About time," his companion replied. "Been quiet too long for my liking. Man can't live on reputation forever." Eva felt Samuel tense beside her, though his examination of the rifles never faltered. She moved closer to the medicine shelf, positioning herself where she could hear better while appearing to study bottles of patent remedies. "You thinking of signing on?" the first man asked. "Might be. Depends on the pay and the risks involved." The second man lowered his voice even further. "Word is, they're looking for a few extra guns. Something about hitting a government shipment." Eva's heart hammered against her ribs. The gang was actively recruiting for the robbery, which meant they knew it would be a harder fight than usual. 6 professional guards would require more firepower than Cole typically brought to his operations. "Where they recruiting?" the first man asked. "Old mining camp about 10 miles north of here, place called Perdition Gulch. Cole's holed up there with his boys, planning their next move." Samuel appeared at Eva's elbow, his arms full of supplies. "Find anything for that stomach trouble?" he asked loudly enough for the whole store to hear. "This might help," Eva replied, holding up a bottle of stomach bitters. Her voice was steady, but Samuel could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her free hand rested protectively over her belly. They completed their purchases in silence, both acutely aware of the 2 men still drinking and talking at the back of the store. As Samuel counted out coins for their supplies, the proprietor leaned closer. "You folks be careful traveling north," he said quietly. "Been some rough characters moving through lately, the kind that don't much care who gets hurt when they're conducting business." "Appreciate the warning," Samuel replied. "We'll stick to the main roads." Outside, they loaded their supplies and mounted their horses without speaking. Only when they were well away from the trading post did Eva allow herself to voice what they'd both learned. "Perdition Gulch. That's where they're planning the robbery. 10 miles north. We can be there by evening if we push hard." Samuel's expression was grim. "Question is, what do we do when we get there?" Eva had been thinking about that same question during the uncomfortable ride from their canyon sanctuary. "We need to know exactly when and where they plan to hit the shipment. The map Jack had was helpful, but it didn't show their route or timing." "Scouting mission, then. Get close enough to gather intelligence without being seen." "There's something else," Eva said, her voice troubled. "They're recruiting additional men. That means they expect heavy resistance." Samuel nodded grimly. 6 professional guards with repeating rifles and a strong defensive position. Cole's not stupid. He knows this won't be like hitting a stagecoach with a driver and shotgun rider. Afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they traveled north, following game trails and dry creek beds that would keep them away from the main roads. Eva's condition made frequent stops necessary, and each delay ate away at their already limited time. But Samuel showed endless patience, helping her down from her horse when the pain became too much, sharing his water and what little food they'd brought from the canyon. During one such rest, Eva found herself studying his profile as he scanned the horizon for signs of other travelers. The scar that marked his face was old but deep, and she wondered what other wounds he carried from his years as a federal marshal. "You never married again," she observed. "After your wife died." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Never saw the point. The job was dangerous enough without giving enemies a way to hurt me through someone I cared about. But you cared about justice, about doing what was right. Used to. Before I learned how easily right and wrong can be twisted by people with enough money and influence." He turned to look at her, and Eva saw old pain in his grey eyes. "Your grandfather never stopped believing, though, even when it cost him everything." "What do you mean?" "The investigation that got Judge Wade killed, your grandfather was part of it. Had been asking questions about territorial contracts, mining claims that didn't match the geological surveys. Making the same connections we're making now." Eva felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. "They killed him too, didn't they? Not fever, poison, or an arranged accident." Samuel's silence was answer enough. "How many others?" Eva asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but I'm starting to think the corruption goes deeper than either of us imagined. This isn't just about one gang robbing Wells Fargo shipments. This is about a network that's been operating for years, eliminating anyone who gets too close to the truth." The baby kicked sharply against Eva's ribs, as if responding to her emotional turmoil. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the solid reality of the life growing within her, innocent, dependent, deserving of a world where justice meant something more than the highest bidder. "We're going to stop them," she said with quiet certainty. "We're going to try. No, We're going to stop them." Eva struggled to her feet, ignoring the ache in her back and the weakness in her legs. "Because if we don't, that baby is going to grow up in a world where men like Cole Blackwood can buy their way out of any consequence, where corruption wears badges and justice hides in canyons." Samuel studied her face for a long moment, and Eva saw something kindle in his expression. Not hope, exactly, but a recognition of the kind of determination that had once driven his own commitment to the law. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said simply, as they remounted their horses and continued north toward Perdition Gulch. Eva found herself thinking about the locket around her neck, about the faded daguerreotype of a man who'd sacrificed everything for his principles. Judge William Merritt had died, believing that right and wrong still mattered, that individual choices could make a difference in the great struggle between order and chaos. Tomorrow, his granddaughter would have the chance to prove he'd been right. Desert stretched endlessly around them, painted in shades of gold and crimson by the setting sun. Somewhere ahead lay a mining camp, where killers planned murder and theft with casual efficiency. Somewhere behind them lay a hidden canyon that had become sanctuary, a place where broken people could remember what it meant to hope. But here, in the space between sanctuary and confrontation, Eva Merritt discovered something she'd thought lost. Forever during her months with the Blackwood gang, she discovered that she still believed in heroes, not the kind from dime novels and traveling shows, but the quiet kind who kept their oaths even when the world forgot them, who chose to stand and fight when running would be easier. Samuel Brennan might not see himself as a hero, but as they rode toward whatever awaited them at Perdition Gulch, Eva knew she was traveling with exactly the kind of man her grandfather would have trusted to carry his badge. The kind who understood that some fights were worth more than survival, and some causes were worth more than safety. Perdition Gulch lived up to its name. The abandoned mining camp clung to the side of a barren hillside, like a collection of broken teeth, its weathered buildings casting long shadows in the dying light. From their vantage point on the ridge above, Eva and Samuel could see smoke rising. From several chimneys, horses tethered near what had once been the main shaft house, and the unmistakable figures of armed men moving between the structures. "Count them," Samuel whispered, passing Eva a small spyglass he'd carried from his martial days. Eva studied the camp through the lens, her stomach tight with familiar dread. She recognized several faces from her months with the gang. Hard men, who killed as easily as they breathed, who measured their worth in violence and coin. 12, maybe 13, she reported quietly. "More than usual. Cole's definitely planning something big." Samuel took back the spyglass and conducted his own survey of the camp. "There," he said, pointing to a larger building near the center of the collection. "See the light in that window? That's where they'll be planning." Eva could just make out figures moving behind the illuminated window, their shadows dancing against the thin curtains. "We need to get closer. Too dangerous. If they spot us—" "They won't," Eva interrupted. "I know their habits, their routines. Guard changes at sunset, and there's always a gap when the new man takes position, maybe 10 minutes where the perimeter's weak." Samuel studied her face in the gathering dusk. "You're talking about infiltration, getting close enough to overhear. They're planning. It's the only way. We need to know the exact timing, the route they plan to take, how many men they're bringing." Eva's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where the baby had grown restless. "And we need to know about their inside man, the one feeding them information. From the territorial government, the weight of what she was proposing settled between them like a stone. Samuel had sworn to protect her, to keep her safe from the very men she was now suggesting they spy on. But Eva was right. Without detailed intelligence, any attempt to warn the Wells Fargo guards would be futile. "I go alone," Samuel said finally. "No. You don't know the camp layout. Don't know which men might recognize you from wanted posters." "I do." Eva's voice carried quiet determination. "Besides, if I'm spotted, I can claim I escaped from whoever killed Jack Morse. Tell them I've been wandering the desert for days." And if they don't believe you, Eva's smile held no humor, then we'll both be dead, and 40,000 in federal gold will disappear into Cole Blackwood's hands. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes studying the camp below, as if looking for alternatives that didn't exist. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. We do this together. But at the first sign of trouble, you run. No heroics, no staying to help. You think of that baby, and you run. Agreed. They waited until full darkness settled over the gulch like a blanket, then began their careful descent toward the mining camp. Eva moved with surprising grace despite her pregnancy, her months with the gang having taught her the art of silent movement. Samuel followed her lead, trusting her knowledge of the terrain and the habits of the men they were hunting. The first guard post was exactly where Eva had predicted, a bored-looking man with a rifle, more interested in the bottle at his feet than in watching for intruders. They slipped past him like shadows, keeping to the deeper darkness between buildings as they worked their way toward the lighted window. The sound of voices became clearer as they approached, and Eva felt her pulse quicken as she recognized Cole Blackwood's distinctive drawl. He was speaking with someone she didn't recognize, a well-dressed man whose voice carried the crisp authority of education and position. "Confirm the shipment will leave Prescott at dawn," the stranger was saying. 6 guards, as we discussed, plus the driver and shotgun rider. They'll be taking the northern route through Willow Creek Canyon. And the cargo? Cole's voice carried lazy confidence. 40,000 in federal gold, bound for the territorial capital. Payment for mining. Contracts and territorial development projects? The stranger paused. Once this shipment disappears, there will be investigations, serious ones. Let them investigate, Cole replied with a chuckle. By the time they figure out what happened, we'll be long gone, and you'll be in position to make sure any evidence points in the wrong direction. Eva pressed closer to the window, straining to see the stranger's face through the gap in the curtains. What she saw made her blood run cold. A distinguished-looking man in his 50s, wearing the kind of expensive clothes that spoke of political position and territorial influence. The timing is crucial, the stranger continued. The ambush must happen before they reach the canyon's narrow point. If they make it to the defensive position at Devil's Throat, even your men won't be able to dislodge them. Samuel tensed beside her, and Eva knew he'd recognized the significance of what they were hearing. This wasn't just robbery planning. It was a detailed briefing from someone with access to classified information about Wells Fargo security procedures. "Don't worry about the timing," Cole said. "My boys know those canyons better than the guards." We'll hit them at Dead Horse Draw, where the road curves around the boulder field. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And afterward? Afterward, you make sure the investigation focuses on the usual suspects. Claim it was Apache raiders, or Mexican bandits, or whatever story works best. Just keep the law looking in the wrong direction while we disappear. Eva felt her unborn child shift restlessly, as if sensing her distress. The corruption they'd suspected was worse than either of them had imagined. The stranger wasn't just providing information. He was actively participating in the planning, ensuring that the robbery would succeed and the perpetrators would escape justice. "There's one other matter," the stranger said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The Merritt woman. Has she been found?" Cole's expression darkened. "Jack was supposed to handle that today. Haven't heard back from him yet. She must be eliminated. Her connection to Judge Merritt makes her too dangerous to leave alive. If she talks to the wrong people, she won't," Cole interrupted. "Even if Jack didn't find her, the desert will finish the job. Nobody survives 3 days in that heat without water." Eva's hand moved instinctively to the locket at her throat, feeling the familiar weight of her grandfather's image against her skin. The conversation was confirming their worst fears. The corruption went all the way to the top of the territorial government, and her grandfather's murder had been part of a larger pattern of elimination. "I should go," the stranger said, rising from his chair. "My absence will be noticed if I'm gone too long." Through the gap in the curtains, Eva finally got a clear look at his face. What she saw made her gasp involuntarily, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the quiet night. Samuel's hand clamped over her mouth, but it was too late. The conversation inside the building had stopped, and Eva could hear the soft scrape of chairs being pushed back, the creak of floorboards as men moved toward the window. What was that? Cole's voice was sharp with suspicion. Could be anything, the stranger replied. Cat, maybe, or a rat, but Cole Blackwood hadn't survived this long by ignoring suspicious sounds. Eva heard his boots on the wooden floor, heard the soft whisper of a revolver being drawn from its holster. Samuel grabbed her hand and pulled her away from the window, but their movement sent a small cascade of pebbles down the hillside. In the sudden silence that followed, the sound was as loud as an avalanche. There, Cole's voice was deadly calm. Someone's out there. The camp erupted into activity as men emerged from buildings, rifles in hand, spreading out in a search pattern that would inevitably find them. Samuel drew his revolver, but Eva knew that even his skill wouldn't be enough against a dozen armed outlaws in their own territory. "Run!" she whispered urgently. "Back the way we came." But as they turned to flee, a familiar voice called out from the darkness behind them. "Well, well, if it isn't little Eva Merritt back from the dead." They froze, recognizing the voice of Tom Bradley, one of Cole's most trusted lieutenants, a man who knew Eva's face as well as his own, who wouldn't be fooled by any story about desert wandering or accidental discovery. Slowly, they turned to face him, and Eva saw her own death reflected. In the bore of his rifle, the hunt was over. The prey had been found, and somewhere in the building behind them she could hear Cole Blackwood laughing, a sound like winter wind through a graveyard, promising violence and an end to all their carefully laid plans. The territorial official, who'd been planning the robbery, melted into the shadows, his expensive clothes and political position protecting him from the consequences of his corruption. But Eva and Samuel had no such protection. No escape from the circle of armed men that was closing around them like the jaws of a steel trap. Tomorrow's robbery would proceed as planned. The 40,000 in federal gold would disappear into outlaw hands, and the corruption that had killed Judge Wade and Judge Merritt would continue, protected by badges and sustained by blood money, unless somehow they could find a way to turn the tables on the men who thought they'd won. The rope cut into Eva's wrists with familiar cruelty, but this time she was bound to a chair in the main cabin rather than left to die in the desert sun. Cole Blackwood sat across from her, his handsome features twisted into an expression of cold amusement, while Samuel hung unconscious from his bonds near the far wall. "You know, Eva," Cole said conversationally, "when Tom told me he'd found you, sneaking around our camp, I almost didn't believe him. After all, Jack was supposed to have settled your hash days ago." Eva kept her expression neutral, despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Jack's dead, along with the other two you sent." Cole's smile faltered slightly. "Is that so? And who, pray tell, managed to kill 3 of my best men?" Eva's eyes flicked toward Samuel's unconscious form. "Someone who knows how to fight back." "Ah, yes, the mysterious stranger who rescued you from certain death. We haven't been properly introduced." Cole stood and walked to where Samuel hung limply in his ropes. Without warning, he backhanded the unconscious man across the face, the sharp crack echoing through the cabin. Samuel's head snapped to the side, but he didn't stir. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, dark against his pale skin. "Strong constitution," Cole observed. "Tom hit him pretty hard with that rifle butt, but don't worry, he'll wake up eventually. And when he does, we're going to have ourselves a nice long conversation about exactly who he is and why he chose to involve himself in our business." Eva forced herself to remain calm, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. The baby had grown restless within her, responding to her stress with sharp kicks and uncomfortable shifts. She needed to buy time, to keep Cole talking until she could find some way to escape, or until Samuel regained consciousness. "Your friend left in quite a hurry," she said. "The well-dressed gentleman. Didn't want to stick around for the interrogation?" Cole's expression darkened. "You saw him, hard to miss. He looked familiar, though I can't quite place where I might have seen him before." Eva let her voice carry just a hint of curiosity, as if she were genuinely trying to remember rather than fishing for information. "Well, that's unfortunate." You, I mean." Cole resumed his seat, but Eva could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested near his gun. "Because now I have to decide whether killing you quickly would be a mercy or a missed opportunity." "What do you mean?" "I mean that some secrets are worth more than others. And the secret of who you saw here tonight, who you might have overheard, planning tomorrow's business, that's a valuable secret indeed." Eva felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night air seeping through the cabin's walls. "You're going to torture me. I'm going to do whatever's necessary to ensure that certain information never reaches the wrong ears." Cole's voice carried the casual tone of a man discussing the weather. "The question is whether you're going to make this easy on yourself, or whether we'll have to get creative." The cabin door opened, and Tom Bradley entered carrying a coil of telegraph wire and a pair of pliers. Eva's mouth went dry as she recognized the tools of a torturer, simple implements that could cause unimaginable pain in the right hands. "Boss," Tom said, "the boys are getting antsy. Want to know if we're still hitting the shipment tomorrow?" "Of course we are. This doesn't change anything." Cole gestured toward Eva and Samuel. "Just means we have a couple of loose ends to tie. Up before we ride out. What about the timing? If these two were supposed to meet someone, if they don't show up, then whoever they were supposed to meet will assume they're dead, which they will be, as soon as we extract whatever useful information." "They might have." Cole's smile was sharp as a blade. "Besides, Tom, you worry too much. Who could they possibly have told? They're obviously working alone." Eva felt a spark of hope at the miscalculation in Cole's reasoning. He was assuming that she and Samuel were operating independently, that their mission was personal rather than part of a larger law enforcement effort. If she could reinforce that assumption, keep him from realizing the true scope of what they knew. "You killed my grandfather," she said suddenly, her voice thick with carefully manufactured emotion. "Judge Merritt, you and your corrupt friends murdered him just like you murdered Judge Wade." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Did we? That's quite an accusation. I know what you did, know about the mining contracts, the territorial development funds, all of it." Eva let tears flow freely, playing the part of a grieving granddaughter seeking revenge rather than a federal informant gathering intelligence. "I came here to make you pay for what you took from me, and you brought your friend here for moral support." Cole's tone was mocking, but Eva could see that he was buying the story. "I brought him because he has his own reasons for wanting you dead. Personal reasons." Cole glanced toward Samuel's unconscious form with new interest. "Is that so? Well then, we'll just have to make sure he's awake for the festivities. Tom, wake our guest up. I want him to see what happens to people who interfere with my business." Tom approached Samuel with a bucket of water, but before he could use it, Samuel's eyes fluttered open. He lifted his head slowly, his grey gaze, taking in the situation with the quick assessment of a trained lawman. "Well, hello there," Cole said pleasantly. "Welcome back to the land of the living, though I'm afraid your stay will be temporary." Samuel said nothing, but Eva saw his eyes flick toward the window, toward the door, calculating distances and possibilities with the methodical precision of a man who'd survived countless dangerous situations. "Cat got your tongue?" Cole continued, "or are you just the strong, silent type? Either way, you're going to tell me exactly who you are and why you thought it was a good idea to kill 3 of my men." "They were trying to kill an innocent woman," Samuel said quietly, his voice hoarse but steady. "Seemed like the right thing to do." Cole laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The right thing to do? How delightfully naive. Tell me, stranger, do you have any idea who you're dealing with here? I know you're a murderer and a thief. I know you're planning to rob a Wells Fargo shipment tomorrow morning. Samuel's grey eyes never left Cole's face. "And I know you won't live to spend a single coin of that gold." The cabin fell silent except for the soft whisper of wind through the gaps in the walls. Cole's amusement faded, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Tom Bradley stepped forward, the pliers gleaming in his hand. "Want me to start working on him, boss? Make him a little more talkative?" But before Cole could answer, a sharp pain shot through Eva's belly, so intense it drove all other thoughts from her mind. She gasped, her body doubling over as much as the ropes would allow, her vision graying around the edges. "Eva!" Samuel's voice was sharp with concern. The pain passed, but it left Eva shaken and nauseous. The baby was coming, not now, not here, but soon. The stress and fear and physical exertion of the past few days had triggered something that couldn't be stopped. "Well, well," Cole said with renewed interest. "Seems like our little family reunion is about to get even more interesting." Eva felt. Another contraction building, weaker than the first, but unmistakable in its meaning. She had hours, maybe less, before her child entered this world of violence and corruption. Hours to find a way to escape, to save Samuel, to prevent tomorrow's robbery from succeeding. Hours to prove that her grandfather's faith in justice hadn't been misplaced, that good people could still make a difference in a world that seemed determined. To reward the worst in human nature. The cabin door opened again, and one of Cole's men stuck his head inside. "Boss, we got a problem. Rider coming up the gulch, moving fast." Cole's expression sharpened. "One of ours?" "Don't think so. Horse is lathered, like it's been ridden hard for miles." Eva felt a flutter of hope. Could it be someone looking for them? Someone who might help turn the tide of this desperate situation? But Cole was already moving, his hand on his gun, his mind calculating the implications of an unexpected visitor. "Tom, watch our guests. If either of them so much as breathes wrong, kill them both." As Cole disappeared into the night to deal with the new arrival, Eva caught Samuel's eye. He was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not just concern for her condition, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like another contraction hit, and Eva realized with crystalline clarity that whatever was going to happen, it would happen soon. The baby wouldn't wait for convenient timing or perfect circumstances. Neither could they. The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, and somewhere in the distance, Eva heard Cole's voice raised in challenge. The mysterious rider had arrived. At exactly the moment when everything hung in the balance, whether that was salvation or disaster, remained to be seen. The rider who dismounted in the flickering light of the camp's torches was not what anyone had expected. Marshal Clay Morrison stood 6 feet tall in his worn boots, his silver hair gleaming beneath a battered hat, his coat dusty from hard travel. But it wasn't his appearance that made Eva's breath catch in her throat. It was the telegram he pulled from his vest pocket as he approached Cole Blackwood. "Got a message for you," Morrison said, his voice carrying the flat authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "From your friends in the territorial government." Cole's hand hovered near his gun, but something in Morrison's manner made him hesitate. "And you are?" "Marshal Clay Morrison, territorial jurisdiction, and before you get any ideas about drawing that iron, you should know I didn't ride out here alone." Morrison's eyes swept the camp, taking in the armed men, the defensive positions. "Got a dozen deputies spread out in the rocks above. One wrong move, and this place becomes a shooting gallery." Eva felt the world tilt around her as the implications crashed over her like a physical blow. Clay Morrison, the marshal Samuel had mentioned, the one they'd planned to contact for help. But if he was here, delivering messages from corrupt territorial officials. Samuel's face had gone ashen, his grey eyes reflecting a pain that went deeper than any physical wound. "Clay," he said quietly, "you son of a bitch." Morrison's attention snapped to the bound figure hanging from the wall, and for a moment his composed expression cracked. "Samuel? Jesus Christ, what are you doing here? I could ask you the same question. Samuel's voice carried 5 years of betrayal, of friendship twisted into something unrecognizable, though I think I'm starting to figure it out. Cole looked between the two men with growing interest. You know each other? We were partners, Morrison said, his voice carefully neutral, before Samuel decided to go bad. Go bad. Samuel's laugh was bitter as desert wind. Is that what you're calling it now, Clay? Is that how you sleep at night? Eva watched the exchange with growing horror as the pieces fell into place. Morrison wasn't here to rescue them. He was part of the corruption they'd been fighting. The well-dressed man she'd seen planning with Cole, the one whose face had looked familiar. You, she whispered, staring at Morrison. You were in the cabin. You're the inside man. Morrison's expression hardened. Smart girl, unfortunately for you, too smart for your own good. Another contraction gripped Eva, stronger than the previous ones, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not, and the situation was spiraling beyond any hope of control. Clay, Samuel said, his voice carrying a note of desperate appeal. Whatever they're paying you, whatever they've promised, it's not worth this. You took the same oath I did, swore to protect innocent people. Innocent people. Morrison's face twisted with something that might have been regret or might have been anger. You want to talk about innocent people, Samuel? Let's talk about my daughter. Eva saw Samuel's expression change, confusion replacing anger. Sarah was going to be married, Morrison continued, his voice growing rough with emotion. Nice young man, schoolteacher from back east. Had everything planned, the wedding, their future together, and then the consumption took her. And there wasn't money for a doctor who might have made a difference. Clay, you know what a marshal's salary is, Samuel. You know what it's like to watch someone you love die because you can't afford to save them. Morrison's hand moved to his vest pocket, where a worn daguerreotype rested close to his heart. These people offered me enough money to ensure that never happens to anyone I care about again. So you sold your badge, sold your honor. I sold my illusions, Morrison snapped. The same illusions that got you framed for Judge Wade's murder, the same ones that would have gotten you hanged if you hadn't run. Samuel went very still. What did you say? You heard me. You think it was random chance that put you near Wade's house the night he was killed? You think those witnesses just happened to be in the right place at the right time? Eva felt the blood drain from her face as she began to understand the true scope of the betrayal they were witnessing. You set me up, Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper. I saved your life, Morrison replied. They wanted you dead, Samuel. You were getting too close to the truth, asking too many questions. I convinced them that framing you would be more effective than killing you. Let you take the blame for Wade's murder. Let you disappear into the desert like a ghost. And Judge Merritt, Eva's grandfather, Morrison's expression grew pained. That wasn't supposed to happen. The old man was supposed to back down after Wade's. In death, supposed to understand the message, but he kept pushing, kept investigating, forced our hand. Eva's vision blurred with rage and grief. Her grandfather had died because he wouldn't abandon his principles, wouldn't let fear silence his pursuit of justice. And the man who'd arranged his murder was standing here, justifying it as necessity. You bastard, she whispered. Morrison turned to look at her, and Eva saw genuine regret in his eyes. I'm sorry about your grandfather, Miss Merritt. He was a good man, an honest man, but he was also a dangerous man, and dangerous men can't be allowed to interfere with operations this important. What operations? Samuel demanded. What's worth killing federal judges and framing innocent marshals? Territory-wide development contracts worth millions of dollars. Mining rights, railroad easements, military supply agreements. Morrison's voice took on the tone of a man explaining simple mathematics. The kind of money that can build or break entire communities. The kind of power that can reshape the entire Southwest. Cole Blackwood had been listening to this exchange with growing impatience. This is all very touching, he interrupted, but we have business to conclude. The shipment leaves at dawn, and I need to know these two are handled before we ride out. Morrison nodded grimly. The telegram I brought contains new orders. The situation has changed. He unfolded the yellow paper and read aloud, "Federal investigation imminent. Clean up all loose ends immediately. No witnesses, no evidence, no trail back to territorial interests. Payment will be doubled upon successful completion." Eva felt another contraction building, and this time she couldn't suppress a gasp of pain. The baby was coming faster now, responding to the stress and trauma of the situation. She had perhaps an hour before the birth became inevitable. "Well, that settles it," Cole said with satisfaction. "Tom, prepare our guests for a permanent rest. And do it quietly. We don't want to attract attention from any other unexpected visitors." But Samuel was staring at Morrison with an expression Eva had never seen before. Not anger, not betrayal, but something that looked almost like pity. "You know what the worst part is, Clay," he said quietly. "I understand why you did it. If it had been my wife instead of your daughter, if I could have saved her by compromising my principles, I might have made the same choice." Morrison's composure cracked completely. Don't you dare forgive me, Samuel. I framed you for murder. I destroyed your life." "You saved my life. You said so yourself." Samuel's voice was calm, almost gentle. "And maybe, in some twisted way, you saved my soul too. Because running from that frame-up taught me something I never would have learned wearing a badge." "What's that?" "That justice isn't something you can delegate to institutions or governments or badges. It's something you have to choose every single day, regardless of the consequences." Samuel looked directly at Morrison, and Eva saw something pass between them, understanding perhaps, or recognition. "You forgot that, Clay, but it's not too late to remember." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face reflecting the struggle between 5 years of corruption and a lifetime of honest service. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "The shipment isn't carrying gold, Samuel. It's carrying evidence. Documents that prove the territorial government's involvement in the corruption, names and dates and financial records. They're moving it to Washington for a federal investigation." Eva felt the world shift around her as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "That's why they moved up the timing. That's why they're recruiting extra men. And that's why everyone who knows about it has to die," Morrison continued, his voice gaining strength. "Because if that evidence reaches Washington, it won't just be outlaws who hang. It'll be senators and territorial governors and federal judges." Cole's face had gone pale as he began to understand what Morrison was saying. "You're telling me we're not robbing a gold shipment. We're stealing government documents. Documents that could bring down the entire territorial administration," Morrison confirmed. "And when the investigation that follows reveals they were stolen by the Blackwood Gang, every federal agency in the country will be hunting you." The cabin fell silent, except for the sound of Eva's labored breathing and the distant whisper of wind through the mining camp. The robbery they'd planned to stop wasn't just theft. It was the destruction of evidence that could expose corruption reaching to the highest levels of government. And somewhere in the desert outside, a Wells Fargo wagon was rolling toward an ambush that would determine whether justice prevailed or whether darkness claimed another victory in the endless struggle for the soul of the American frontier. Eva felt another contraction grip her, stronger and more urgent than before. Time was running out in more ways than one, and the choices made in the next few hours would echo through generations yet unborn. The silence that followed Morrison's revelation stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Eva could see the calculations running behind Cole Blackwood's eyes, the weighing of risk against reward, the cold mathematics of survival that had kept him alive in a profession where most men died young and violent. "How long have you been?" "Playing both sides, Marshal?" Cole asked, his voice deceptively casual. Morrison's hand rested near his gun, but Eva could see the tremor in his fingers. "Long enough to know when a game's been rigged from the start." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going." To get, Morrison's eyes flicked to Samuel, then to Eva, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine remorse. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Cole, but I won't be part of murdering an innocent woman and her unborn child." Tom Bradley shifted nervously, his rifle still trained on Samuel, but his attention split between multiple threats. The other gang members who'd crowded into the cabin sensed the tension building, their hands drifting toward their weapons with the instinctive preparation of men who'd survived by reading violent weather. "That's unfortunate," Cole said, drawing his revolver with fluid grace. "Because I'm afraid your conscience has become a liability we can no longer afford." The gunshot was impossibly loud in the confined space of the cabin. Eva screamed, her vision blurring as cordite smoke filled the air, and her ears rang with the aftermath of violence. When her sight cleared, she expected to see Morrison's body on the floor. Instead, she saw Tom Bradley crumpled against the wall, Morrison's smoking revolver in his hand, the marshal's face set in lines of grim determination. "Like I said," Morrison growled, "I won't be part of murdering innocents." Cole's face contorted with rage, but before he could bring his own weapon to bear, the cabin erupted into chaos. The other gang members, caught off guard by the sudden reversal, scrambled for position as Morrison dove behind an overturned table, his gun barking death in the confined space. Eva felt another contraction tear through her, this one so powerful. It drove all other thoughts from her mind. The baby was coming now, ready or not, and the sounds of gunfire and shouting voices seemed to fade into the background as her body took control of the situation. "Samuel!" she gasped, her voice barely audible above the violence surrounding them. Samuel was already moving, using the chaos to work at his bonds with desperate efficiency. The rope around his wrists had loosened during the struggle, and years of experience had taught him exactly how to exploit such opportunities. "Hold on," he called back, his voice tight with effort. "Just hold on a little longer." But Eva wasn't sure she could hold on. The contractions were coming faster now, overwhelming in their intensity, and she could feel her child's urgent desire to enter this world of violence and corruption. She closed her eyes and tried to focus on breathing, on the techniques her mother had taught her during childhood visits to neighbors' births. The gunfight raged around her with deadly precision. Morrison had positioned himself behind the heavy table, using it as cover while he systematically eliminated Cole's men. But he was outnumbered, and Eva could see blood seeping through his shirt sleeve where a bullet had found its mark. Cole himself had taken cover behind the cabin's stone fireplace, his face twisted with fury as he realized how completely his carefully laid plans had unraveled. "You old fool," he shouted at Morrison. "You think saving them changes anything? You think it washes the blood off your hands?" "No," Morrison replied, pausing to reload his revolver with steady hands. "But it's a start." Samuel's bonds finally gave way, and he dropped from the wall like a cat, his marshal's instincts taking over as he assessed the tactical situation. Eva watched him move toward where Tom Bradley had dropped his rifle, each step careful and measured, despite the bullets whistling through the air around him. Another contraction hit Eva, and this time she couldn't suppress a cry of pain. The sound seemed to cut through the chaos, causing both Morrison and Cole to glance in her direction. "Jesus," Morrison muttered, seeing her condition. "Samuel, we need to get her out of here, now." But Samuel was already moving, his recovered rifle speaking with authority as he began to drive Cole's remaining men back toward the cabin's entrance. The confined space that had been their prison was becoming their advantage. The outlaws couldn't bring their superior numbers to bear in the narrow confines. "The window!" Samuel called to Morrison. "Cover me while I get her untied." Morrison's revolver barked twice more, and another of Cole's men stumbled backward through the doorway, clutching a shattered shoulder. The odds were evening rapidly, but Eva knew they couldn't maintain their position much longer. More gang members would be arriving soon, drawn by the gunfire, and their ammunition wouldn't last forever. Samuel reached her side, and began working. At the ropes that bound her to the chair, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos surrounding them. "How bad is it?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the circumstances. "Bad," Eva gasped as another contraction gripped her. "The baby's coming, soon." Samuel's face went pale, but his hands never stopped working at the knots. "We're going to get you out of here, get you somewhere safe." "Where?" Eva managed between waves of pain. "The whole territory's corrupt. There's nowhere to run." "Then we don't run," Samuel replied, his grey eyes meeting hers with quiet determination. "We finish this. Tonight." The ropes fell away, and Eva nearly collapsed as the circulation returned to her arms and legs. Samuel caught her, his strong hand steadying her as she struggled to stand on trembling legs. "Can you walk?" Eva tested her weight, fighting through. Another contraction that threatened to buckle her knees. "I can try." Morrison appeared at Samuel's shoulder, blood streaming from a graze across his cheek. "There's maybe 6 of them left, but they're regrouping outside. We've got minutes before they come at us in force." "The evidence," Samuel said suddenly. "The documents Morrison mentioned, where are they?" "Wells Fargo wagons about 5 miles north of here, moving slow because of the weight." Morrison checked. "His ammunition with professional efficiency. They'll reach Dead Horse Draw by dawn." "That's where Cole planned to hit them," Eva said, her voice strained but clear. "He knows the terrain, knows exactly how to set up the ambush." Samuel was quiet for a moment, his mind working through the implications. When he spoke, his voice carried the calm authority of a man who'd found his purpose again. "Then we get there first, set up our own ambush." Morrison stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Samuel, there's 3 of us against however many of Cole's men survived this fight, and one of us is about to give birth. The odds don't matter," Samuel interrupted. "What matters is that evidence reaches Washington. What matters is that the corruption your friends have built gets exposed to the light." Eva felt another contraction building, but this time she also felt something else. A surge of strength, of determination that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her physical body. Her grandfather's blood ran in her veins, and Judge William Merritt had never backed down from a fight that mattered. "He's right," she said, her voice gaining power despite the pain. "We finish this, tonight." Outside the cabin, Cole's voice rose in anger as he rallied his remaining men for a final assault. But inside, 3 people who'd been written off as dead were preparing to make their own stand against the darkness that had claimed too many good lives. Samuel checked his rifle one more time, his fingers finding the familiar weight of his marshal's badge in his vest pocket. Morrison reloaded his revolver with steady hands, his eyes reflecting 5 years of guilt, finally finding a chance at redemption. And Eva Merritt, granddaughter of an honest judge, prepared to bring new life into a world where justice still had a fighting chance. The battle for the soul of the territory was about to begin in earnest, and for the first time in years, the forces of law and order weren't planning to retreat. The escape from Perdition Gulch happened in a blur of gunfire and desperate improvisation. Morrison's horse carried Eva, while Samuel and the marshal fought a running battle through the mining camp, using darkness and their intimate knowledge of defensive tactics to stay ahead of Cole's pursuing men. Eva clung to the saddle horn with white knuckles, her contractions coming in waves that threatened to unseat her with each surge of pain. The baby had chosen the worst possible moment to make its entrance into the world, but nature cared nothing for human convenience or tactical considerations. "There!" Samuel called out, pointing toward a narrow ravine that cut between 2 rocky outcroppings. "We can lose them in there." They plunged into the darkness of the ravine, their horses picking their way carefully over loose stone and thorny scrub. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as Cole's men struggled to follow their trail in the treacherous terrain. But Eva knew they hadn't escaped, merely bought themselves time. Cole Blackwood was many things, but he wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. He would regroup, organize a proper search, and hunt them down with the methodical patience of a professional killer. "How much farther to Dead Horse Draw?" Morrison asked, his voice tight with concern, as he watched Eva's obvious distress. 3 miles, maybe 4, Samuel replied. "But we'll have to circle around to avoid Cole's men." Eva felt another contraction. "Grip her, this one's so powerful, it nearly bent her double." "I don't think I can make 3 miles, she gasped. Samuel brought his horse alongside Morrison's, reaching out to steady Eva as she swayed in the saddle. "Talk to me. How bad is it?" "Bad. The baby's coming whether we want it to or not." Eva's voice was strained but determined. "We need to find shelter, somewhere I can—" Another contraction cut off her words. Morrison was scanning the surrounding landscape with the practiced eye of a man who'd spent years tracking fugitives through hostile territory. "There," he said, pointing toward a cluster of boulders about a 1/4 mile ahead. "Natural windbreak, defensible position, and there's water. I can hear it trickling." They reached the rocky shelter just as Eva's strength gave out completely. Samuel caught her as she slid from the saddle, her legs too weak to support her weight. Morrison quickly surveyed their position, noting the clear fields of fire and the multiple escape routes that years of law enforcement experience had taught him to identify automatically. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it'll have to do. Samuel, help me get her comfortable while I check the perimeter." Samuel spread his coat on the sandy ground behind the largest boulder, creating a makeshift birthing bed while Eva fought through another wave of contractions. The sound of running water came from somewhere in the darkness, a thin stream that trickled down from the rocks above, providing the fresh water they would desperately need. "Eva," Samuel said gently, kneeling beside her, "I need you to listen. And to me, I've delivered foals, helped with cattle births, but I've never—" "Neither have I," Eva interrupted with a weak laugh. "Guess we'll figure it out together." Morrison returned from his reconnaissance, his expression grim. No sign of immediate pursuit, but they're out there. Cole's regrouping, probably planning to hit us at first light. How long do we have? 4 hours, maybe 5. Dawn's still a ways off. Morrison settled into a defensive position where he could watch their back trail. "Question is, will that be enough time?" Eva felt the baby shift within her, a movement that spoke of imminent arrival. "It's going to have to be." The next hour passed in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Samuel did his best to assist, following Eva's increasingly desperate instructions, while Morrison kept watch for any sign of Cole's men. The desert night was cold, but sweat beaded on Eva's forehead as her body worked to bring new life into the hostile world. "I can see the head," Samuel reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Just a little more, Eva. You're almost there." Eva bore down with every ounce of strength she possessed, her cry of effort echoing off the surrounding rocks. And then, suddenly, the pressure eased, and she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby announcing its arrival. "It's a girl," Samuel said softly, his hands gentle as he lifted the tiny, squirming form. "She's perfect, Eva. Absolutely perfect." Eva collapsed back against the rocky ground, tears streaming down her face as she reached for her daughter. Her baby was small but obviously healthy, her cries strong and indignant as Samuel carefully wrapped her in a clean shirt from his saddlebags. "Hello, little one," Eva whispered, holding her daughter close. "Welcome to the world." Morrison glanced back from his watch position, his weathered face softening at the sight of mother and child. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "She's beautiful." But even as they celebrated the miracle of birth, the reality of their situation pressed down around them like the desert night. Somewhere in the darkness, armed killers were hunting them. In a few hours, the Wells Fargo wagon carrying crucial evidence would reach Dead Horse Draw, where Cole Blackwood planned to destroy it, along with everyone who might testify about territorial corruption. "We need to move," Samuel said reluctantly. "I know it's too soon, but if we stay here much longer—" "I know." Eva struggled to sit up, her daughter nursing contentedly at her breast. Just give me a few minutes to get my strength back." Morrison appeared at Samuel's shoulder, his expression troubled. "We've got another problem, look." He pointed toward the eastern horizon, where the faintest hint of grey was beginning to show against the star-filled sky. Dawn was coming faster than they'd expected, and with it the time when Cole would launch his final assault. "The wagon will be at Dead Horse Draw within the hour," Morrison continued, "and Cole's men are already moving. I can see their dust against the stars." Samuel stood and walked to the edge of their rocky shelter, studying the terrain with tactical precision. Dead Horse Draw was visible in the distance, a narrow defile where the old freight road wound between towering rock formations. Perfect for an ambush, impossible to escape once the shooting started. "How many guards with the wagon?" he asked. "6, plus the driver and shotgun rider," Morrison replied. "Good men, professional fighters, but they won't be expecting an attack from their own government's allies." Eva felt her daughter's tiny hand grasp her finger with surprising strength, and something crystallized in her mind. This child would grow up in whatever world they created in the next few hours. She would inherit either justice or corruption, hope or despair, depending on the choices made by 3 exhausted people in a pile of desert rocks. "We're going to stop them," Eva said, her voice gaining strength despite her physical exhaustion. "All of them. Cole, the corrupt officials, the whole rotten system." Samuel turned back to look at her, and Eva saw something kindle in his grey eyes, not just determination, but a recognition of the kind of fierce maternal protectiveness that could move mountains when properly motivated. "Yes," he said simply, "we are." Morrison checked his ammunition one more time, his movements automatic after years of preparation for violence. "Then we'd better get moving, because ready or not, the final battle's about to begin." In the distance, the sound of hoofbeats began to echo off the canyon walls as 2 forces converged on Dead Horse Draw. One carried corruption and death, the other justice and hope. But both were willing to fight to the end for what they believed in, and somewhere between them, a newborn baby slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware that her first sunrise would be painted with gunpowder and blood. Dead Horse Draw earned its name from the bleached bones that littered its narrow floor, the remains of pack animals that had died trying to navigate the treacherous passage. Now it would earn a new reputation as the place where the future of the Arizona Territory was decided in blood and gunpowder. Eva crouched behind a weathered boulder, her newborn daughter secured in an improvised sling against her chest. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to flee, to find safety for her child. But she knew there was no safety anywhere if Cole Blackwood succeeded in destroying the evidence that could expose the territorial corruption. Samuel lay prone atop a rocky outcropping, his rifle trained on the approach road where the Wells Fargo wagon would appear at any moment. Morrison had positioned himself on the opposite side of the draw, creating a crossfire that would give them their only chance against superior numbers. "Movement," Samuel called softly. "Quarter-mile out." Eva peered through the pre-dawn gloom and saw the dark shape of a heavily loaded wagon rolling slowly through the desert scrub. 6 mounted guards rode in formation around it, their rifles ready, but their attention focused on the wrong threats. They were watching for Apache raiders or Mexican bandits, not for an ambush orchestrated by their own government. "Where's Cole?" Morrison's voice drifted across the canyon from his concealed position. Samuel swept his rifle scope across the surrounding terrain, searching for any sign of the outlaw gang. "Don't see them yet. They're here, though, waiting for the perfect moment." The Wells Fargo wagon rolled closer, its wheels crunching over gravel and scattered bones. The driver was a grizzled veteran with alert eyes, while the shotgun rider kept his weapon across his knees, ready for instant use. Both men had the look of professionals who'd survived by being cautious and thorough. Eva's daughter stirred against her chest, making soft sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. She pressed her hand gently against the baby's back, whispering wordless comfort while her eyes scanned the rocks for any sign of movement. Then she saw them, muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers from concealed positions throughout the canyon. Cole's men had positioned themselves with tactical precision, using the same natural cover that Samuel and Morrison had chosen. The Wells Fargo guards never had a chance. The wagon lurched as horses screamed and men shouted warnings. The driver slumped forward with blood blooming across his chest, while the shotgun rider managed to get off one blast before a rifle bullet spun him from his perch. "Now!" Samuel's voice cut through the chaos. His rifle spoke with deadly authority, and one of Cole's hidden gunmen pitched forward from his rocky nest. Morrison's revolver barked from across the canyon, and another outlaw crumpled behind inadequate cover. But there were too many of them, and they had the advantage of prepared positions. The surviving Wells Fargo guards had taken cover behind their wagon, but they were pinned down by accurate fire from multiple directions. Eva watched the battle unfold with growing desperation. Even with Samuel and Morrison's intervention, the guards were being systematically eliminated. In a few minutes, Cole would have the wagon and its precious cargo of evidence. That's when she saw him, Cole Blackwood himself, moving with fluid grace from rock to rock, working his way closer to the wagon while his men kept the guards occupied. He carried a canvas bag that would hold enough dynamite to destroy the wagon and everything in it. "Samuel!" Eva called out. "Cole's moving on the wagon, left side, using the boulder field for cover." Samuel's rifle swung toward the indicated position, but Cole was already moving again, his years of survival teaching him never to stay in one place too long. The shot missed by inches, striking sparks from the rock where Cole had been a moment before. Eva felt her daughter begin to cry, the baby's distress adding to the chaos of the gunfight. She rocked gently, trying to provide comfort while watching Cole work his way closer to his objective. One of the Wells Fargo guards made a desperate break for better cover, but a bullet from an unseen rifleman spun him around and sent him crashing to the rocky ground. Now only 2 guards remained alive, and they were running low on ammunition. "We're losing them," Morrison called out, his voice tight with frustration. That's when Eva made a decision that would have terrified her just days before. Rising from her concealed position, she began working her way down toward the canyon floor, moving carefully to avoid dislodging loose stones that might give away her position. "Eva, what are you doing?" Samuel's voice was sharp with alarm. "Something stupid," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to paralyze her, "but necessary." She reached the edge of the road just as Cole emerged from cover, his dynamite ready to complete the destruction of the evidence wagon. He saw her at the same moment she saw him, and his face split into a cold smile. Well, he said, his revolver appearing in his hand with deadly speed. "If it isn't the ghost of Perdition Gulch, come to watch me finish what I started." Eva stood in the middle of the road, her baby daughter cradled against her chest, facing down the man who'd left her to die in the desert. "I came to stop you." Cole laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You? A half-dead woman with a newborn baby? Eva, sweetheart, you always were too stubborn for your own good." "Maybe. But I'm also Judge William Merritt's granddaughter, and I won't let you destroy everything he stood for." Something flickered in Cole's eyes, uncertainty perhaps, or recognition of the kind of determination that had made her grandfather such a formidable enemy of corruption. "Your grandfather was a fool who couldn't see the changing times," Cole said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "The old ways are dead, Eva. Law and order, justice and righteousness. They're all just words now. Money and power are the only things that matter. You're wrong." Eva took a step forward, and Cole's gun hand tightened on his weapon. "There are still people who believe in something more than profit. People who'll stand up and fight when it matters." Behind Cole, she could see Samuel working his way down from his rocky perch, using the outlaw's focus on her to close the distance. Morrison was doing the same from the other side, their pincer movement almost complete. but Cole was too experienced to be caught completely off guard. At the last second, he sensed the approaching danger and spun toward Samuel, his revolver rising to fire. That's when Eva did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped forward and placed herself directly between Cole's gun and Samuel, her baby daughter, the only shield she had to offer. "No more killing," she said quietly. "It ends here." Cole's face contorted with rage and frustration. "Get out of my way, Eva. I won't warn you again." "I'm not moving." For a moment that stretched like eternity, the canyon fell silent except for the soft crying of Eva's daughter. Cole's finger tightened on the trigger, his cold eyes calculating the odds of shooting through Eva to reach Samuel. Then Morrison's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Cole Blackwood, you're under arrest for murder, robbery, and conspiracy against the territorial government." Cole's head snapped around, and he saw the marshal standing 20 feet away with his badge pinned prominently to his vest and his revolver trained with deadly precision. "Clay Morrison," Cole said with disgust, "the man who sold his soul for 30 pieces of silver. What gives you the right to arrest anyone?" "The right of a federal marshal who's finally remembered his oath," Morrison replied. "Drop your weapon." "Cole, it's over!" The standoff stretched for another heartbeat. 3 armed men and a woman with a baby facing each other in the growing light of dawn. Around them, the surviving Wells Fargo guards watched from their cover, their own weapons ready, but their targets unclear. Then Cole made his choice. Instead of surrendering, he raised his revolver toward Eva and her child, his face twisted with the kind of rage that comes from having everything slip away at the moment of victory. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the confined space of the canyon. But when the smoke cleared, it was Cole Blackwood who lay sprawled in the dust, Morrison's bullet having found its mark with the precision that had once made him the territory's most respected lawman. Eva sank to her knees, her legs finally giving out as the adrenaline drained from her system. Samuel was at her side immediately, his strong arms supporting her as she held her daughter close. "It's over," he said softly. "It's finally over." Around them, the surviving members of Cole's gang were throwing down their weapons, recognizing the futility of continued resistance. The Wells Fargo guards emerged from cover, their relief evident as they realized the ambush had been turned in their favor. And in Eva's arms, her daughter slept peacefully, unaware that she'd just witnessed the moment when justice finally triumphed over corruption in the wild heart of the Arizona Territory. 6 months later, the hidden canyon that had once been Samuel Brennan's sanctuary had transformed into something altogether different. Where gunpowder smoke had once filled the air, now the sweet scent of baking bread drifted from the adobe dwelling's chimney. Where the sound of violence had echoed off stone walls, now there was only the gentle murmur of running water and the soft laughter of a woman speaking to her child. Eva sat beside the spring, her daughter Grace playing contentedly in her lap. The baby had grown strong and healthy in the peaceful months since that terrible night at Dead Horse Draw, her dark eyes bright with curiosity as she reached for the dancing patterns of sunlight on water. "She has your stubborn streak," Samuel observed, approaching with an armload of firewood. The federal marshal's badge gleamed on his vest, newly issued by a territorial government that had been purged of corruption in the aftermath of the evidence revelations. "And your sense of justice, I hope," Eva replied, adjusting the simple silver band that adorned her finger. They'd been married 2 months ago in the small church at Copper Ridge, with Marshal Morrison standing as witness and half the territory's honest citizens in attendance. Samuel set down the wood and knelt beside them, his scarred face soft with contentment as he watched his adopted daughter grasp at butterfly wings. The transformation in him had been as complete as Eva's own. The haunted fugitive had become a man at peace with himself and his place in the world. "Any word from the territorial capital?" Eva asked. "Morrison sent a telegram yesterday. The last of the corrupt officials were sentenced to federal prison, and the new governor's already implementing the reform legislation your grandfather drafted before he died." Samuel's voice carried quiet satisfaction. Judge Merritt's vision for an honest territorial government is finally becoming reality. Eva touched the locket at her throat, feeling the familiar weight of her grandfather's image against her skin. The photograph had survived everything. The desert heat, the violence, the corruption that had tried to bury his memory. Now it served as a reminder of what one person could accomplish when they refused to compromise their principles. The ranch is coming along well, Samuel continued, gesturing toward the eastern end of the canyon where they'd begun construction of a proper homestead. Should have the main house finished before winter sets in. Eva smiled at the pride in his voice. Samuel had thrown himself into the work of building their new life with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to law enforcement. Every board was carefully measured, every stone properly fitted, as if he were constructing something meant to last for generations. "And your appointment to the territorial court?" she asked. "Any second thoughts?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, his grey eyes reflecting the play of light on water. The territorial government had offered him a position as a federal judge, recognizing both his legal experience and his role in exposing the corruption that had plagued the region for years. "Some days I think I'm better suited to building barns than dispensing justice," he admitted. "But then I remember that someone has to stand guard, has to make sure what happened to your grandfather and Judge Wade never happens again." Grace gurgled happily and reached for Samuel's badge, her tiny fingers drawn to the bright metal. He lifted her carefully, his large hands gentle as he supported her small body. "What do you think, little one?" he asked softly. "Should your old papa trade his hammer for a gavel?" The baby's response was to grab his nose and laugh with pure delight, as if the question itself was absurd. Eva felt her heart swell with a happiness she'd never thought possible during those dark months with the Blackwood gang. "She's right, you know," Eva said. "You'll make a fine judge. The territory needs someone who understands that justice isn't something you can buy or sell." The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the canyon passage, and Samuel automatically checked his sidearm before recognizing the familiar rhythm. Morrison emerged from the narrow entrance a few minutes later, his silver hair gleaming. "In the afternoon sun." "Clay," Samuel called out in greeting. "Perfect timing, Eva just put coffee on." Morrison dismounted and approached their gathering beside the spring, his weathered face reflecting the peace that had settled over all their lives since the corruption had been exposed and punished. "Congratulations are in order," he said, producing an official-looking document from his vest. "The territorial legislature confirmed your appointment to the bench, Judge Brennan. You'll be sworn in next month." Samuel accepted the commission with steady hands, though Eva could see the emotion in his eyes. After 5 years of exile and disgrace, his name had been not only cleared, but honored with one of the highest positions in territorial government. "There's something else," Morrison continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone. "The territorial governor wants to name the new courthouse after Judge William Merritt. Seems fitting, given his sacrifice for the cause of justice." Eva felt tears prick at her eyes. Her grandfather's name would be carved in stone, ensuring that future generations would remember a man who died rather than compromise his principles. It was the kind of lasting memorial he would have appreciated, not a monument to ego, but a reminder of ideals worth fighting for. "He would have been proud," she said softly. "He would have been proud of all of us," Morrison replied. "We finished what he started, exposed the corruption he died trying to fight. The territory's finally clean." As if responding to the weight of the moment, Grace reached out and grasped Eva's locket, her small fingers tracing the familiar outline of her great-grandfather's face. 3 generations connected by a chain of silver and the unbreakable bonds of family honor. "What about you, Clay?" Samuel asked. "Any plans for retirement, now that the territory's been cleaned up?" Morrison's smile was tired but satisfied. "Figure I'll stick around a while longer. Help train the new marshals, make sure they understand what the badge really means." He paused, looking out over the peaceful canyon. Besides, someone needs to keep you honest, Judge Brennan. They shared the comfortable laughter of people who'd been through hell together and emerged stronger for the experience. The coffee Eva had promised was shared around the spring while Grace played contentedly in her mother's arms, secure in the knowledge that she'd been born into a world where justice still mattered. As the sun began its descent toward the western rim of the canyon, painting the stone walls in shades of gold and crimson, Eva reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd awakened bound and helpless in the desert, abandoned by people she'd trusted and facing certain death. Now she sat beside the man she loved, holding the daughter they were raising together, surrounded by the peace they'd fought so hard to achieve. The hidden canyon was no longer a refuge from the world. It was the foundation upon which they were building a better world, one honest decision at a time. Grace yawned and settled more comfortably against her mother's shoulder, her dark eyes drifting closed as the day's warmth began to fade. In her sleep, she smiled as if dreaming of all the possibilities that lay ahead in a territory where corruption had been replaced by justice, where fear had given way to hope, and in the gathering twilight, 3 people who'd learned the true. Cost of Honor sat quietly beside a spring that had flowed clear and true for longer than human memory, watching the first stars appear in a sky vast enough to hold all their dreams for tomorrow. The desert stretched endlessly around their hidden sanctuary, but it no longer seemed hostile or unforgiving. It was simply home, a place where broken people had learned to heal, where justice had finally triumphed over corruption, and where a new generation would grow up believing that individual choices could still make a difference in the great struggle between light and darkness. Some battles, Eva realized, were worth more than survival. Some causes were worth more than safety, and some promises once made could only be kept with blood and sacrifice. But when the promise was kept, when the battle was won, when the cause was achieved, then the sacrifice became something sacred, something that echoed through generations, and reminded future generations that honor was not an empty word, but a living force that could reshape the world. As the canyon settled into the blue twilight of another desert evening, the Brennan family prepared for tomorrow with the quiet confidence of people who'd learned that hope, like water in the desert, was precious precisely because it was so hard to find. And in the distance, barely audible above the gentle murmur of the spring, came the sound Samuel had been listening for without realizing it, the sound of his daughter's peaceful breathing, proof that innocence could still flourish in a world where good people chose to stand and fight for what they believed in. The story that had begun with abandonment and betrayal had ended with love and justice triumphant, and that, Eva knew, was exactly the kind of ending her grandfather would have written if the choice had been his to make.